The human ship arrived without announcement, which was the first mistake anyone made about it. In a volume of space governed by notice, transponder rituals, and 1,000 layers of inherited caution, the vessel simply existed where it had not been before. It did not blaze into being with violent distortion or herald itself with the ornamental flares favored by older species. It was there, an object of matte black planes and irregular angles, coasting at a speed that suggested patience rather than power. Sensors struggled to agree on its dimensions, not because it was concealed, but because its geometry defied the expectations built into every instrument that tried to understand it. Teavithov watched the readouts ripple and revise themselves, feeling a deep irritation that expressed itself as a tightening of the sensory filaments along his thorax. He had overseen border observation for 112 standard cycles, and the region under his care was quiet by design. Quiet was safety. Quiet was order. The arrival of an unregistered vessel was neither. "It is not broadcasting," said Keshran, her voice resonating through the command chamber's shared medium. "No identity lattice, no intent declaration, no cargo harmonics. It is behaving as if alone." Teavith did not like that phrasing. Nothing that crossed the border was ever alone, not truly. Even a derelict carried history, context, debris of purpose. "All vessels are required to declare," he said. "If they do not, they are in violation." "Yes," Keshran replied, "but this one may not recognize the requirement." That possibility troubled him more than open defiance would have. Ignorance meant unpredictability, and unpredictability frayed the careful balance the border existed to preserve. He extended a thought to the wider network, requesting comparative analysis. Responses came back in fragments, overlapping impressions of uncertainty and faint alarm. The vessel did not match any known architecture. It lacked the flowing symmetry of the aquatic collectives, the dense spires of the stone-bonded clans, or the layered crescents favored by the old expansionist polities. Its surface appeared scarred, not by damage but by intent, as if the builders had chosen to leave marks rather than erase them. Heat signatures were minimal, emissions tightly controlled. Whatever powered it was efficient in a way that made Teavith uneasy. "Send a standard hail," he ordered. "Expanded linguistic spectrum. Emphasize non-hostility." The signal went out, a complex braid of mathematics, basic physical constants, and encoded courtesy forms that had served the border for centuries. It was the closest thing the region had to a universal greeting. They waited. The ship continued on its course, angling gently toward the nearest inhabited system without altering speed. After a measured interval, a response arrived. It was not the expected echo of translated protocol, but a burst of compressed data that took several moments to unpack. When it resolved, it carried something unexpected. It was a voice, not a synthesized tonal approximation or symbolic exchange, but a recording of a single entity speaking, unfiltered except for the necessary adjustments to make it audible across species. The voice was rough-edged, carrying the subtle imperfections of organic sound. It spoke in a cadence that suggested confidence without aggression. "This is the vessel Groundfall, operated by the people called human. We are aware that we have crossed into a region governed by others. We did not announce because we did not know how. We announce now. We request dialogue." The chamber stilled. Teavith felt the shared medium tense as dozens of minds absorbed the implications. A new species, not a rumor or an extrapolation, but a declaration. The border existed precisely to prevent uncontrolled encounters of this kind, to manage the pace at which knowledge spread and conflicts ignited. And yet here they were, faced with an unknown people who had crossed the line without even realizing it existed. "Human," Keshran repeated, testing the unfamiliar sound. "The phonemes are simple, likely a species evolved with frequent vocal communication." "Likely," Teavith said. He considered the message carefully. There was no obfuscation, no ritualized superiority, no attempt to claim precedence. The admission of ignorance was either genuine or a masterful deception. Both possibilities carried risk. "Open a channel," he said at last. "Controlled, limited bandwidth. We will speak with them." The reply was immediate, as if the humans had been waiting with attention focused. The same voice came through, this time live, carrying subtle variations that confirmed it was not a looped message. "This is Groundfall," the voice said. "You are heard." Teavith shaped his response through the medium, allowing the translation layers to adapt his thoughts into sound. "You have entered a regulated region. I am Teavith of Lan, tasked with oversight of this border. State your origin and purpose." There was a pause, brief but noticeable. When the human spoke again, there was a quality Teavith struggled to categorize. It might have been thoughtfulness, or perhaps caution learned through experience. "We originate from a star you do not have a name for yet," the human said. "We call it home. Our purpose is exploration, contact, and survival. We did not know this region was regulated. We apologize for the intrusion." An apology offered so quickly was rare. Teavith had negotiated with powers that considered apology a weakness, a concession that invited exploitation. Yet this human offered it without prompting, without apparent calculation. That alone set them apart. "Your vessel's design suggests significant technological capability," Teavith said. "Exploration at this scale implies a broader presence." "Are there many of you?" Another pause, this one longer. "There are enough," the human said. "Not so many that we can afford to be careless." That answer carried weight. It implied a history of loss, of hard-earned restraint. Teavith felt a ripple of interest move through the shared medium. Others were listening closely now. "You approach an inhabited system," he said. "You will alter course and hold position while we assess the situation." There was no immediate compliance. Instead, the human responded, "We will slow and hold at your indicated coordinates. We ask one thing in return." Teavith narrowed his sensory focus. "State it. Do not assume we are a threat simply because we arrived unannounced," the human said. "We did not come to take, we came to learn." It was an unusual request. Most species demanded rights, access, or guarantees. This one asked for an assumption, a starting point for interaction. Teavith considered the risk. Assumptions could be dangerous, but so could refusing them. "You will be assessed by your actions," he said. "That is the only assurance I can offer." "That will have to do," the human replied. Groundfall altering course now. The vessel's trajectory shifted, subtle but clear. It decelerated, coming to rest in the void with a precision that spoke of mastery over inertia. Teavith allowed himself a fraction of relief. Compliance was a promising sign. As the immediate tension eased, analysis surged. Data from the initial scans was combed through, compared, extrapolated. The humans used materials that combined resilience with flexibility in unfamiliar ways. Their power generation did not rely on any of the common methods. Their internal layout suggested redundancy layered upon redundancy, systems designed to fail without catastrophe. "They build as if expecting damage," Keshran observed. "Or as if they have experienced it," Teavith replied. Hours passed in careful evaluation. The humans did not attempt to move, did not broadcast further messages beyond maintaining the open channel. When Teavith finally reached out again, it was with a measured decision forming in his mind. "Human representative," he said, "you will send one of your number aboard a neutral platform for direct dialogue. No weapons." There was no hesitation this time. "Agreed," the human said. "I will come myself." "You are authorized to transport," Teavith said. "Follow the guidance signal." The platform was an ancient construct, predating most of the current political arrangements. It existed in a pocket of space, stabilized by long-forgotten engineering, its interior adaptable to a wide range of physiologies. Teavith had conducted countless meetings there, watching species test each other through posture and presence. He wondered how the humans would approach it. The answer arrived sooner than expected. A small craft detached from groundfall, compact and angular, its movements smooth and deliberate. It docked without incident, aligning with tolerances that suggested the humans either possessed exceptional adaptability or had designed their systems to accommodate the unknown. When the hatch opened, Teavith experienced a moment of dissonance. The human was smaller than he had expected, encased in a flexible covering that protected without obscuring. Its posture was upright, balanced, its forward-facing sensory organs focused with an intensity that bordered on confrontational by some species' standards. Yet its hands, small and precise, were open and empty. "I am called Marrow," the human said, stepping forward. The voice matched the one from the channel, now enriched by the subtle sounds of breathing and movement. "I speak for my people when I can. I listen for them always." Teavith extended a portion of his presence, allowing the platform to translate his form into something the human could perceive without harm. "You stand in a place of evaluation," he said. "Your species is unknown to us. That is not a crime, but it is a risk." Marrow inclined the head slightly, a gesture that carried neither submission nor defiance. "We understand risk," the human said. "We live with it." They regarded each other across the adaptable space, two beings shaped by different worlds and histories. Teavith felt the weight of the moment settle into his awareness. This was how great changes began, not with declarations or wars, but with a single conversation held on unyielding ground. "Tell me," Teavith said, "why you came so far from your origin." Marrow did not answer immediately. When the human spoke, the words were chosen with care. "Because staying still was more dangerous," Marrow said. "Because we learned that survival is not just enduring, but understanding what lies beyond the next horizon. Because we refuse to be alone in a universe this vast, even if being known means being judged." Teavith absorbed that, feeling the resonance of it ripple outward. He had heard many justifications for expansion, for contact, for risk. Few had spoken of refusal, of a choice made against isolation rather than toward conquest. "You will be judged," he said, "not only by me." "I would expect nothing less," Marrow replied. Beyond the platform, the human ship waited, patient and watchful. Beyond it, the border stretched on, a line drawn by cautious minds across a restless cosmos. Teavith sensed, with a clarity that surprised him, that the line had already shifted, not by force or decree, but by the simple fact of human presence. The evaluation had begun, and with it, a future no one in the command chamber could yet fully imagine. The evaluation did not proceed as Teavith of Lan expected, which in itself became the second mistake anyone made about humans. The first had been assuming their arrival was careless. The second was assuming they would fit into established procedures once corrected. The platform's adaptive environment adjusted temperature, gravity, and atmospheric composition in slow gradients, seeking a stable overlap between Teavith's requirements and Marrow's. The human noticed the shifts almost immediately, posture changing by small degrees, breath pattern adjusting, eyes narrowing and widening in subtle calibrations. Teavith realized with a flicker of surprise that the human was not merely enduring the adjustments, but actively mapping them, building an internal model of the space they shared. "You are attentive," Teavith observed. Marrow's mouth curved slightly, exposing teeth in what the translation lattice flagged as a non-threatening expression. "We learn to be," the human said. "Environments rarely stay the same for long." That answer carried implications Teavith filed away for later consideration. The evaluation protocol dictated a series of disclosures, questions designed to place a new species within a web of comparative metrics. Most first contacts followed predictable arcs of misunderstanding, curiosity, and guarded revelation. Humans, it seemed, were inclined to disrupt arcs simply by how they listened. Teavith began with fundamentals. "Your people call yourselves human," he said. "Is that a self-designation with meaning or merely a sound?" "It is a word we use for ourselves," Marrow replied. "Its meaning has shifted over time. It once distinguished us from the world around us. Now it mostly reminds us that we are a single group made of many differences." "A unifying term," Teavith said. Many species fracture under expansion. We nearly did, Marrow said, without hesitation, more than once. That admission echoed through the shared medium beyond the platform. Observers noted the lack of embellishment, the absence of defensive framing. Humans, at least this one, spoke of near failure as a matter of record rather than shame. Teavith adjusted his approach. Your vessel's construction suggests you prioritize resilience, he said. Your internal systems are layered beyond necessity for normal operation. Marrow nodded. Normal operation is a luxury, the human said. We design for when things go wrong. Conflict, Teavith asked. Sometimes, Marrow said. More often accident, miscalculation, or bad luck. Space is not forgiving. Neither are we when we forget that. The platform's ambient field shifted slightly as Teavith processed that. Many species attributed disaster to external forces or hostile intent. Humans appeared to include themselves in the list of dangers they planned against. That level of self-scrutiny was uncommon. Your presence here introduces variables, Teavith said. The region you entered exists to manage contact. Uncontrolled interaction has led to collapse before. Marrow's gaze did not waver. We understand caution, the human said. We practiced isolation for a long time. It kept us alive, but it also kept us small. When we finally looked outward, we did so knowing we might find reasons to regret it. And yet you came anyway, Teavith said. Yes, Marrow replied, because stagnation is also a kind of collapse. It just takes longer. That statement resonated with something deep in Teavith's memory, echoes of ancient debates among his own kind, long before borders were formalized and enforced. He wondered, not for the first time, whether the structures he served were preserving life or merely delaying inevitable change. Beyond philosophy, there were practical matters. How many systems does your people occupy? He asked. Marrow exhaled slowly. Fewer than 10 with permanent habitation, the human said. More with temporary presence. We expand carefully. Carefully, Teavith repeated. Yet you crossed a border you did not know existed. We mapped what we could, Marrow said. Your border is subtle. That is not a criticism. It is effective. Teavith accepted that as neither flattery nor challenge. Your expansion vector brought you close to multiple established populations, he said. Unmediated contact could provoke hostility. We know, Marrow said. We have our own history of meeting the unknown badly. The platform recorded physiological markers from the human, slight changes in skin tone, micro-movements around the eyes. The analysis suggested recollection tied to emotional weight. Teavith considered pressing further, but restraint seemed wiser. What do you seek from us? He asked instead. Marrow was silent for a longer interval this time. When the human spoke, the words were measured. Recognition, Marrow said. Context. We do not want to stumble into conflicts we do not understand. We want to learn the shape of the wider community before we leave marks we cannot erase. That phrasing caught Teavith's attention. Many newcomers spoke of trade, technology exchange, or territory. Humans spoke of marks, of consequences that endured beyond intent. It suggested a long view, one shaped by regret as much as hope. You ask much, Teavith said. Knowledge is not freely given in this region, it is curated. We are not asking for everything, Marrow said, only for enough to avoid being fools. The shared medium hummed with layered reactions. Some observers interpreted the human's words as humility, others as a calculated posture. Teavith felt neither explanation fully satisfied. There was something else there, a groundedness that did not rely on appearing lesser or greater than others. Your people will be observed, he said, your movements restricted until an assessment is complete. Marrow inclined the head again. That is acceptable, the human said. We expected it. Many do not, Teavith said. We learn to expect limits, Marrow replied. They are often the difference between survival and catastrophe. The evaluation session extended far beyond its initial parameters. Teavith asked about human biology, learning of a species adapted to a narrow range of conditions that nonetheless thrived through artificial environments and technological mediation. He learned of a sensory apparatus tuned to patterns and motion, of cognition shaped by social complexity and narrative memory. Humans told stories, not as ritualized history alone, but as tools for transmitting caution, inspiration, and identity. Marrow spoke of this without invoking art or song, focusing instead on the functional role of shared experience. We remember by telling each other what happened, Marrow said, not just what worked, but what failed. Failure as instruction, Teavith said, that is efficient. It is painful, Marrow said, but pain is a good teacher if you survive it. That conditional lingered, if you survive it. Teavith noted how often human statements included implicit acknowledgements of mortality, of fragility. Many spacefaring species, once freed from planetary constraints, spoke as if death had become an anomaly. Humans, it seemed, carried it with them as a constant companion, shaping their choices. When the session finally paused, Teavith withdrew slightly, signaling a temporary recess. Marrow remained still, patient, as if understanding that observation continued even in absence of dialogue. Teavith retreated into the shared medium where debate surged in earnest. They are dangerous, one voice insisted. Not aggressive, but adaptable. They will not remain contained. All species expand, another countered. Better one that acknowledges consequence. They conceal capability, a third added. Their ship's emissions are too clean. They are hiding strength. Teavith absorbed the arguments, weighing them against his own impressions. They conceal in order to control, he said, not to deceive. There is a difference. You assume much, Keshran said privately. I observe, Teavith replied. They complied without protest. They offered apology without demand. They speak of failure openly. Or they perform humility to disarm us, Keshran said. That is possible, Teavith acknowledged. But performance requires an audience expectation. They do not yet know us well enough to tailor one. The debate circled, touching on policy, precedent, fear of disruption. Teavith felt the weight of his role acutely. As overseer, his recommendations would shape not only the fate of the humans, but the stability of the border itself. He returned to the platform. Marrow looked up as he reasserted presence, eyes tracking the subtle shift in the field. Teavith found himself appreciating that attentiveness more than he expected. The assessment will continue over an extended period, he said. During that time, your people will remain within a defined corridor. You will have access to limited information about neighboring polities sufficient to avoid accidental provocation. Marrow's posture relaxed fractionally. Thank you, the human said. That is more than we hoped for. Hope is not a metric we use, Teavith said, but your response is noted. There is one thing we would like to offer in return, Marrow said. Teavith paused. State it. Transparency, Marrow said. You may observe us as closely as you wish. Our ships, our methods, our debates. We will not hide what we are, even the parts that reflect poorly on us. That was unexpected. Observation was usually resisted, negotiated, constrained. To offer it freely was either reckless or sincere. Teavith considered the implications. Complete transparency is rare, he said. So is trust, Marrow replied. We find one works better with the other. Teavith felt a subtle shift within himself, a recalibration of assumptions he had carried for cycles. We will begin with limited observation, he said. Trust, like caution, is incremental. Marrow nodded. That is fair. The session concluded with formalities, Marrow returning to the human ship under escort. As groundfall resumed its holding pattern within the designated corridor, Teavith remained on the platform longer than necessary, contemplating the encounter. The border had been designed to slow change, to filter it into manageable increments. Humans, he sensed, were not inherently destabilizing, but they carried momentum, a refusal to remain static that could strain any system not prepared for it. Yet they also carried restraint, learned through hardship rather than doctrine. In the cycles that followed, observers would note the humans' behavior closely. They would see a people who argued among themselves openly, whose command structures allowed dissent without fracture. They would see technology maintained with obsessive care, not because it was revered, but because it was understood as fallible. They would see a species that trained for cooperation as deliberately as others trained for war. For now, Teavith recorded his preliminary assessment, choosing his phrasing with care. He did not label humans as threat or ally. Instead, he wrote that they were a force shaped by survival, inclined toward connection but tempered by memory. He recommended continued engagement. As he sealed the report, a thought surfaced unbidden. Borders could hold back ignorance and violence, but they could also hold back understanding. With humans now standing on unyielding ground, looking outward rather than inward, Teavith wondered how long the line would remain where it was, and whether its eventual movement would be an act of failure or growth. The first measurable disruption caused by humans was not political or military, but procedural. Observation teams assigned to monitor groundfall and its accompanying support craft reported an anomaly within 3 standard days. The humans were observing back. This was not unexpected in a basic sense, as all species gathered information about their surroundings, but the manner in which the humans did so unsettled more than one analyst. They did not merely collect data passively. They attempted to understand the logic behind the systems that constrained them. Teavith Ovlan received the initial report while engaged in a routine arbitration between 2 minor polities disputing mineral rights along a shared asteroid belt. He set that matter aside as the data streams converged, their urgency unmistakable. "They are mapping enforcement patterns," Keshrin said, her presence sharp with concern. "Not escape routes, not weaknesses, patterns." "Explain," Teavith said. "They log response times, communication delays, variance between observers," she continued. "They are building a model of how the border thinks." Teavith considered that carefully. "That does not imply hostile intent." "No," Keshrin agreed, "but it implies preparation." Preparation, Teavith reflected, was not inherently aggressive. Every species that survived learned to prepare. The question was what the humans were preparing for. He summoned additional feeds, watching recordings of human internal discourse captured through the agreed observation channels. The humans did not conceal their debates. They argued in dense clusters, exchanging perspectives rapidly, interrupting, correcting, refining. Authority existed, but it was fluid, shifting with context rather than rigid hierarchy. One exchange drew Teavith's attention. A group of humans discussed the border protocols they had encountered, speculating on their origin and intent. They did not dismiss them as arbitrary obstacles. Instead, they treated them as the accumulated wisdom of previous crises. "Someone built this because something went wrong before," one human said. "Figure out what, and you know what they're afraid of." That statement resonated deeply with Teavith. It mirrored his own understanding of the border's history, forged from calamities that still echoed through cultural memory. The human's instinct to infer trauma from structure suggested a mindset attuned to consequence rather than conquest. Still, unease persisted. The Oversight Council convened in a compressed interval, representatives projecting fragments of themselves into the shared deliberation space. The humans were the sole topic. "They adapt too quickly," said a voice from the outer spiral collectives. "They will outpace our ability to contextualize them." "Adaptation is not aggression," countered another. "We punish species for stagnation and fear those that learn. That is inconsistent." "They have not yet been tested under pressure," a third interjected. "Compliance during observation proves little." Teavith listened, weighing each argument. "Then we apply pressure," he said finally, "measured. Informational, not coercive." The council stilled. Keshrin turned her attention fully to him. "You propose a stress test." "I propose controlled exposure," Teavith said. "Introduce them to a scenario that reflects the realities of interpolity interaction. Observe their response." "What kind of scenario?" someone asked. "One involving dispute," Teavith replied. "Limited stakes, real consequences." Thus the third mistake regarding humans was set in motion. assuming that exposure to conflict would reveal weakness before strength. The opportunity arose sooner than expected. A trading convoy from the Hellier assemblage, a mercantile polity known for rigid adherence to protocol and aggressive defense of contractual interpretation, requested passage through the corridor adjacent to the human holding zone. Historically, such convoys demanded exclusive transit windows, refusing to share space with unregistered entities. Granting their request would require temporarily constraining human movement further, denying it risked economic retaliation. Teavith authorized a mediated interaction. Marrow returned to the platform when summoned, posture alert but unguarded. "You wish to change our movement parameters," the human said, having reviewed the preliminary notice. "Yes," Teavith replied. "Another polity will transit nearby. They have requested isolation." Marrow absorbed that. "Do they fear us?" "They fear uncertainty," Teavith said. "As many do." Marrow nodded slowly. "We can adjust course," the human said, "but we would like to speak with them." "That was not part of the request," Teavith said. "It is part of ours," Marrow replied. "We do not want our first impression on the wider community to be absence." Teavith considered the implications. Allowing direct contact carried risk, but denying it might reinforce perceptions of the humans as something to be hidden. "The interaction would be limited," he said, "supervised." "That is acceptable," Marrow said. The Hellier representatives arrived cloaked in layers of formalism, their communication dense with contractual language and implied leverage. They acknowledged Teavith with perfunctory respect, then turned their attention to the human with barely concealed disdain. "You are an unregistered presence," said the Hellier speaker, their voice sharp and metallic. "Your proximity introduces unacceptable variables." Marrow listened without interruption. When the Hellier finished, the human responded calmly. "We understand your concern," Marrow said. "We are new. We do not yet fit neatly into your systems. That does not make us dangerous." "It makes you unquantifiable," the Hellier replied. "Which is worse?" Marrow did not bristle. Instead, the human asked, "What do you lose if we remain present?" The Hellier paused, clearly unaccustomed to such a question. "Certainty," they said at last. "Then let us reduce the uncertainty," Marrow said. "We will share our projected movements, our communication windows, our fail-safes. You may monitor us during your transit. If we deviate, you withdraw and file complaint." Teavith felt a ripple of surprise through the shared medium. The humans were offering oversight to a third party voluntarily. The Hellier hesitated. Their culture prized control through exclusivity. To accept shared oversight was to acknowledge parity they did not believe the humans possessed. Yet refusal would appear unreasonable in the face of such accommodation. "Your proposal will be evaluated," the Hellier said stiffly. The transit proceeded, with the humans maintaining strict adherence to their declared parameters. They did not attempt to communicate beyond what was agreed. When a minor navigational anomaly occurred within the Hellier convoy, it was a human system that flagged it first, transmitting the alert through the supervision channel without embellishment. The Hellier corrected course, avoiding what would have been a costly collision with a debris field. The incident was recorded, analyzed, and quietly circulated. When the convoy departed, the Hellier issued a formal statement. It did not praise the humans, but it withdrew its objection to their presence. "That was effective," Keshran noted later. "It was," Teavith agreed. "They defused conflict by sharing risk. Not all polities will respond the same way," she cautioned. "No," Teavith said, "but they have demonstrated a pattern." As observation continued, that pattern repeated. Humans encountered rigidity with flexibility, suspicion with transparency, hostility with preparedness rather than provocation. They did not assume goodwill, but neither did they escalate preemptively. When confronted with unfamiliar customs, they asked questions rather than making demands. When they erred, they acknowledged it openly. Yet beneath this surface of cooperation lay something harder, more difficult to quantify. Analysts noted the humans' training simulations, glimpses of contingency planning that extended far beyond current necessity. They prepared for scenarios involving overwhelming force, systemic collapse, betrayal by assumed allies. They did not dwell on these possibilities publicly, but they did not ignore them either. They expect the worst, one analyst observed, even as they behave as if hoping for the best. Hope is not incompatible with caution, Teavith replied. It is informed by it. The Oversight Council reconvened after several cycles of observation. Positions had shifted. Those initially most fearful now argued for structured integration, citing the humans' stabilizing influence on minor disputes. Others warned that such influence could become leverage. They make themselves useful, a voice said. That creates dependency. Or trust, another countered, which is how communities form. Teavith listened, then spoke. We cannot judge them solely by what they might become, he said. We must judge them by what they do now and how they respond when tested. As you have been testing them, Keshran said, not unkindly. Yes, Teavith said, and they have responded without attempting to game the system. Silence followed. The council was not accustomed to unanimity, but a consensus began to coalesce. The humans would not remain indefinitely confined. A decision loomed. Before it could be formalized, the test none of them had planned arrived. An automated distress signal flared from a system just beyond the human corridor, its signature unmistakable. A research habitat belonging to the Viex Continuum had suffered catastrophic power failure, its life support systems degrading rapidly. The Continuum was slow to react, bound by layered authorization protocols that required consensus before intervention. Time, however, was not waiting. Human sensors detected the signal within moments. Groundfall altered posture, engines warming. Marrow contacted Teavith directly. We can reach them in time, the human said. We have redundant life support modules and evacuation capacity. You are not authorized, Teavith said. I know, Marrow replied, but if we wait for authorization, some of them will die. That word carried weight. Die, not fail, not expire, not be lost. The human used it without euphemism. Teavith felt the familiar tension between protocol and consequence tighten within him. The border existed to prevent cascading disasters born of impulsive action. It had also, in the past, been the reason aid arrived too late. You would violate restriction, he said. Yes, Marrow said. We would accept the penalty, but they would live. The shared medium erupted as observers reacted. Some demanded immediate enforcement action. Others hesitated, recalling the humans' prior conduct. Teavith closed his sensory focus, isolating himself for a fraction of a cycle. He thought of the border's origin, of lives lost to hesitation and overreach alike. He thought of the humans' insistence on consequence, on marks that could not be erased. He reopened his awareness. You may proceed, he said, under my authority. Marrow did not waste time on gratitude. Understood, the human said. Groundfall is en route. The human ship moved with sudden urgency, engines flaring as it crossed a line that had held for generations. Observation feeds tracked its progress, every maneuver precise, every adjustment calculated to minimize further disruption. They reached the failing habitat with moments to spare, extending modular support structures, ferrying beings of unfamiliar physiology into environments rapidly adapted for them. When Continuum response finally arrived, they found their people alive, stabilized, sheltered by human technology. The aftermath was turbulent. Formal complaints were lodged. Commendations were issued. Debates raged. But the fact remained. The humans had acted, and in doing so, had saved lives without escalating conflict. Teavith reviewed the incident alone, replaying Marrow's words. We would accept the penalty. He realized then that the humans did not view rules as absolutes, but as tools meant to serve survival. When those tools failed, they were willing to risk themselves to compensate. That realization unsettled him more than any display of force could have. A species willing to bear consequence for action taken in defense of others was not easily controlled, but neither was it easily corrupted. As he finalized his report, Teavith understood the third mistake clearly. They had assumed pressure would reveal human limits. Instead, it revealed human priorities. And priorities, once understood, changed everything. The repercussions of the rescue did not settle into equilibrium. They radiated outward, altering trajectories long considered stable. The border itself did not move, not in any measurable spatial sense, but the assumptions that upheld it began to shift, subtle at first, then with growing momentum. For the first time in many cycles, Teavith of Land found himself summoned not as an arbiter of external disputes, but as a subject of internal scrutiny. The Oversight Council convened under full quorum, a rarity reserved for existential questions. Every representative carried the weight of their polity's history, fears, and ambitions, and now, layered atop those, the undeniable fact that a new species had crossed the border not for conquest, not for trade, but to prevent death at personal cost. "You exceeded your mandate," said a voice from the inner lattice, its tone sharpened by formal censure. "You authorized an unsanctioned intervention." "I exercised discretionary authority," Teavith replied, "within the scope of preserving regional stability." "Stability was not under immediate threat," another voice countered. "A single habitat does not constitute regional destabilization." "Death has a way of escalating," Teavith said. "So does resentment when aid is withheld by procedure rather than necessity." The council did not dispute the outcome. The rescued members of the Viex Continuum had already transmitted statements of survival, their collective cognition altered by the experience of near extinction. They did, however, dispute precedent. If humans are permitted to act beyond restriction, others will demand the same latitude, Keshran said, her presence carefully neutral. "The border's authority relies on consistency. Consistency must serve purpose," Teavith replied. "Otherwise it becomes ritual." The debate stretched, looping through philosophy and pragmatism until a deeper concern surfaced, one that had been present since the humans' arrival but had not yet been voiced directly. "What if they had failed?" asked a representative from the far periphery. "What if their intervention had caused greater loss? Would we accept responsibility for authorizing it?" Teavith did not answer immediately. When he did, his words were deliberate. "We accept responsibility every time we choose inaction," he said. "The difference is that we rarely acknowledge it." That statement fractured the deliberation space. Some recoiled from its implication, others leaned into it with uncomfortable recognition. The border had been built to prevent catastrophe, but it had also, at times, insulated its keepers from the moral weight of delay. The council recessed without formal resolution, deferring judgment while directing expanded observation of human activity. Teavith was neither censured nor commended. The ambiguity suited no one, but it allowed events to continue unfolding. Humans did not exploit the moment. Groundfall returned to its designated corridor, its crew resuming routine operations as if the rescue had been an expected duty rather than a defining act. When queried by observers about their reasoning, human responses were consistent. "There were people in danger," one said. "We had the ability to help. Not helping was not an option. But you risked sanction," an analyst pressed. "Yes," the human replied. "We weighed that. Against what? Against letting them die." This simplicity confounded models built on cost-benefit hierarchies more elaborate than human social structures. Analysts struggled to encode a decision-making framework that placed life above procedural consequence without tipping into recklessness. Humans, it seemed, navigated that boundary intuitively, guided by a cultural memory saturated with hard choices and their aftermath. As weeks passed, requests for limited interaction with humans increased. Minor polities, often marginalized by larger powers, saw in humans a potential counterbalance, not through force, but through presence. The humans did not align themselves formally with any group, but they did listen. They hosted dialogues aboard their ships, adapting environments patiently, allowing others to speak without interruption. They asked questions that cut past posturing, questions about needs rather than claims. Teavith observed several of these exchanges. In one, a small nomadic polity described centuries of displacement caused by shifting trade routes and territorial consolidations. They did not ask humans for territory or protection. They asked how humans maintained cohesion while moving between worlds. Marrow listened, then spoke of early human migrations, of divisions that nearly tore their species apart, of frameworks built not to erase difference, but to allow it to coexist. The humans did not present these as solutions, only as experiences. We failed a lot, Marrow said. Sometimes catastrophically, we are still failing in places. But we learned that pretending unity exists when it does not is worse than admitting fracture and working anyway. The nomadic representatives departed without agreements signed, but with something shifted in their posture, a subtle easing of the constant defensiveness that marked their interactions with more established powers. Not all responses were positive. Larger polities grew wary, interpreting human engagement as soft influence, a way of shaping discourse without overt authority. Rumors circulated of human long-term strategies, of patient encroachment masked by benevolence. Teavith was aware of these concerns. He shared some of them. He requested a private audience with Marrow, not on the neutral platform this time, but aboard Groundfall itself. The request was granted without hesitation. The human ship's interior was functional rather than austere, its design emphasizing accessibility and redundancy over aesthetic uniformity. Surfaces bore marks of use, repairs visible rather than concealed. Teavith sensed that this was intentional, a cultural choice to acknowledge where rather than deny it. Marrow greeted him without ceremony. "You wanted to speak freely," the human said. "This is as close as we get." "You are altering the region," Teavith said, foregoing preamble. Marrow did not deny it. "We are participating," the human replied. "Change happens when participation begins. Some see your actions as influence," Teavith said, "as a subtle form of power." "Influence is unavoidable," Marrow said. "So is power. The question is how it is used and whether it can be refused." Teavith considered that. "Can your influence be refused?" "Yes," Marrow said. "We do not force interaction. We do not trade aid for allegiance. We leave when asked." "That may change if your interests diverge," Teavith said. "Then you should judge us by what we do when that happens," Marrow replied, "not by what you fear we might do." There it was again, that insistence on evaluation through action rather than projection. Teavith found it both reassuring and unsettling. "You accept penalties readily," he said. "Do you not fear accumulation of consequence?" Marrow's expression shifted, subtle lines forming around the eyes. "We fear it constantly," the human said. "That is why we choose carefully. Penalties can be survived. Regret is harder." That word returned, carrying weight. Regret. Humans seem to treat it as a resource to be minimized, learned from, rather than denied. Teavith wondered how many of the border's strictures had been shaped by unacknowledged regret, crystallized into law to avoid confronting past failures. As if in response to that thought, the next crisis emerged, one that would force the issue of human integration into sharper focus. A long-dormant conflict between two major polities flared unexpectedly, triggered by a misinterpreted resource survey and exacerbated by historical grievances neither side was willing to revisit openly. Fleets mobilized, rhetoric hardened, and the border's communication channels filled with demands for arbitration. Teavith recognized the pattern immediately. This was the kind of conflict the border was designed to contain, to slow until negotiation replaced escalation. Yet this time, the presence of humans altered the calculus. Both sides referenced the recent rescue, each framing it to suit their narrative. One accused the other of manipulating humans as covert allies. The other accused the first of obstructing humanitarian action. The humans themselves issued no statements. As tensions mounted, an incident occurred at the edge of the contested zone. A civilian transport, flagged as neutral, was caught between maneuvering fleets, its engines damaged by stray fire. The situation echoed the earlier habitat crisis, but with greater political stakes. Intervention by any established polity risked being interpreted as aggression. Groundfall detected the distress call. Marrow contacted Teavith. "We can reach them," the human said. "But this time someone will object." "Yes," Teavith said. "Everyone will. If we do nothing, they will die," Marrow said. "And if you act, you may be blamed for escalation," Teavith replied. Marrow was silent for a long moment. When the human spoke, the voice carried a heaviness Teavith had not heard before. "Then this is the test," Marrow said. "Not of us, but of whether your systems can tolerate action that does not belong to them." The weight of that settled heavily. Teavith saw the branching futures unfold in his mind, each fraught with loss. He realized then that the border's greatest vulnerability was not external threat, but its reliance on delay as virtue. "You will proceed," he said at last, "but this time you will not act alone." Marrow's eyes sharpened. "Explain." "I will invoke joint authority," Teavith said. "I will compel observer participation from multiple polities. Your intervention will be collective, not singular." Marrow considered that. "Shared responsibility," the human said. "Yes," Teavith replied. "Shared consequence." The operation unfolded under unprecedented scrutiny. Human vessels moved with their usual precision, but now flanked by observer craft broadcasting every action in real time. When they reached the damaged transport, humans did not board immediately. They coordinated, established shared protocols, adapted their equipment to interfaces not designed for them. The process was slower than if they had acted alone, but it was visible, accountable. Lives were saved. Afterward, blame had nowhere to settle easily. No single actor could be isolated as aggressor or manipulator. The incident became, instead, a reference point, cited in subsequent negotiations as proof that cooperation under pressure was possible. Teavith watched the aftermath with a sense of something irreversible having occurred. The border had not broken, but it had bent, allowing a new kind of action within its constraints. In private, Keshran addressed him. "You are reshaping your role," she said, "from enforcer to facilitator." "Perhaps that was always the role," Teavith replied. "We simply forgot." The humans did not claim credit. They returned to their corridor, their behavior unchanged. Yet the region around them was no longer the same. Conversations carried different assumptions. Polities recalibrated their strategies, factoring in not just power, but response. Teavith understood now that the fourth mistake regarding humans was assuming they would seek control once given influence. Instead, they redistributed it, forcing others to confront choices they had long deferred. On unyielding ground, the humans stood not as conquerors or saviors, but as participants unwilling to let systems hide from their own consequences. And that, Teavith suspected, would prove more destabilizing than any fleet. The fifth mistake regarding humans emerged slowly, like stress fractures propagating through a structure assumed sound because it had stood for so long. It was the belief that human behavior, once understood, would remain consistent under prolonged exposure to complexity. The border had adapted, bending rather than breaking, and in doing so had created new spaces for action. Within those spaces, humans continued to operate as they always had, but the environment around them began to change in response, and that change introduced pressures no initial assessment had fully anticipated. The region entered a period of dense interaction. Trade routes were recalculated to pass closer to the human corridor, justified by efficiency but motivated by curiosity and, in some cases, quiet dependency. Diplomatic envoys requested human observers for negotiations, citing their perceived neutrality and their demonstrated willingness to act when process failed. Disputes that once languished in procedural stasis now reached conclusions, sometimes messy, sometimes incomplete, but rarely ignored. Teavith monitored these developments with growing unease. Stability metrics improved in the short term. Casualty projections declined. Yet beneath those favorable indicators, he detected a rising tension among older powers, a resentment not always articulated but increasingly evident in subtle obstruction and rhetorical framing. They are becoming a reference point, Keshran noted during one of their private exchanges. Not an authority, but a comparison. Yes, Teavith said, and comparisons invite judgment. Some polities adapted, others resisted. A few began to test the limits of the new dynamics, probing for fractures they could exploit. It was inevitable that someone would attempt to force the issue, to compel humans into a position that would either expose hypocrisy or justify containment. That attempt came from an unexpected quarter. The Narath coalition had long been considered a stabilizing presence in the region, conservative in expansion, meticulous in adherence to border regulation. Their fleets were formidable but rarely mobilized. Their rhetoric emphasized order and continuity. When they requested a formal summit to address what they termed emergent asymmetries introduced by human activity, the Oversight Council accepted, anticipating a difficult but manageable dialogue. The summit convened on a fortified station near the border's densest node, its environment calibrated for multi-species tolerance but rigid in its spatial hierarchies. Teavith attended as facilitator. Marrow arrived as human representative, accompanied by a small delegation chosen for technical and ethical expertise rather than rank. From the outset, the Narath framed the discussion as concern for systemic integrity. The border exists to ensure no single actor exerts disproportionate influence, their lead speaker said. Human interventions, while ostensibly humanitarian, have altered incentive structures. Some polities now delay their own responsibilities, anticipating human action. Marrow listened without interruption. When the Narath finished, the human responded carefully. "We did not intend to replace responsibility," Marrow said. "We intended to prevent avoidable death." "Intent does not negate effect," the Narath replied. "Your presence creates moral pressure. Others appear callous by comparison." Teavith recognized the pivot. This was not about procedure, but about narrative. The Narath were not accusing humans of wrongdoing. They were accusing them of reframing virtue. "Are you asking us to stop helping?" Marrow asked. "We are asking you to restrict yourselves to roles explicitly authorized by the Council," the Narath said. "No independent intervention." "That would have changed the outcome of past incidents," Marrow said. "Yes," the Narath replied. "That is the point." The chamber grew tense. Observers across the region tuned in, aware that whatever emerged from this exchange would ripple outward. Teavith interjected. "The authorization process has evolved," he said. "Joint authority mechanisms now exist precisely to address such scenarios. And yet humans remain the catalyst," the Narath said. "Remove the catalyst, and the system returns to equilibrium." Marrow's expression shifted, not to anger, but to something heavier. "Equilibrium for whom?" the human asked. "For the region," the Narath replied. "For the systems," Marrow said. "Not always for the people inside them." That distinction struck deep. Teavith felt it resonate with his own doubts, long suppressed beneath duty. The summit adjourned without resolution, but the Narath did not wait. Within cycles, they issued a formal proposal to the Oversight Council. Human activity would be confined strictly to observation and mediation. Any operational intervention would require unanimous pre-authorization. Failure to comply would result in sanctions, including enforced withdrawal from the border region. The proposal split the council. Some supported it, citing long-term stability. Others opposed it, arguing that codifying paralysis was itself destabilizing. Teavith found himself at the center of the fracture, his prior decisions now scrutinized as precedent. As debate intensified, a series of minor crises erupted, none individually catastrophic, but collectively straining response capacity. Supply shortages in marginal systems, infrastructural failures compounded by delayed repair, disputes escalating faster than mediation channels could absorb. Humans assisted where they could, but increasingly hesitated, aware that any action might be seized upon as justification for restriction. Marrow sought Teavith out again, this time without formal summons. "We are being boxed in," the human said, "not by law alone, but by expectation." "Yes," Teavith said, "you are no longer an anomaly. You are a variable others are trying to control." Marrow's gaze hardened slightly. "If we comply fully, people will suffer," the human said. "If we act anyway, we confirm the narrative that we cannot be contained." "Containment is a language of fear," Teavith said. "Fear shapes policy," Marrow replied. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of accumulated consequence pressing in. "What would you do?" Marrow asked finally. The question caught Teavith off guard. As overseer, he was accustomed to advising, directing, arbitrating. Being asked what he would do personally stripped away role and protocol. "I would refuse to let the system absolve itself," he said slowly. "I would force choice into the open." Marrow studied him. "That would escalate conflict." "Yes," Teavith said, "but it would make the conflict honest." The opportunity for such honesty arrived abruptly. A core Narath installation suffered a cascading failure, triggered by a misaligned energy lattice during routine maintenance. The failure propagated faster than automated safeguards could respond, knocking out containment fields and threatening to destabilize the station's orbit. Tens of thousands were at risk. The Narath issued a distress call. Authorization protocols activated immediately, but the very mechanisms designed to ensure consensus became obstacles. Multiple Narath subcouncils had to agree on external assistance. Rival polities demanded assurances that intervention would not be leveraged politically. Time bled away in procedural exchange. Human sensors flagged the failure within moments. Groundfall was already calculating intercept trajectories. Marrow contacted Teavith. "We can stabilize their lattice," the human said. "We have compatible field modulators." "You know what this will mean?" Teavith replied. "Yes," Marrow said. "If we act, the Narath will accuse us of proving their case. If we do not, they will die because of the rules they defend." The irony was brutal. Teavith felt the full weight of his role settle into clarity. The border was not being tested by human action, but by its own rigidity in the face of reality. He reached into the shared medium, issuing a transmission not just to the Council, but to every observing polity. "The authorization delay is fatal," he said. "Humans are prepared to intervene. I will not stop them. If sanctions follow, they will follow by collective decision in full view of the outcome." The response was chaos. Objections, threats, urgent demands to rescind, but no counterorder came in time. Groundfall moved. The human intervention was precise and restrained. They did not assume control of the station. They did not override Narath systems wholesale. They stabilized critical nodes, reinforced failing fields, and withdrew as soon as the immediate danger passed. Casualties were minimal. The station held. When the dust settled, the Narath issued a statement. It was measured, formal, and seething with contradiction. They acknowledged the effectiveness of the intervention. They reiterated their concern about unauthorized action. They stopped short of demanding immediate sanctions. The Council reconvened in emergency session. Emotions ran high. Some demanded expulsion. Others argued that enforcing withdrawal now would expose the system's moral bankruptcy. Teavith spoke once, near the end. "You cannot unlearn what has been demonstrated," he said. "Humans will act when lives are at stake. You may punish them for it, but you cannot pretend the choice did not exist." "What do you propose?" a voice demanded. "I propose we stop pretending neutrality is the same as virtue," Teavith said. "I propose we formalize rapid response authority that prioritizes life over unanimity, with shared oversight and consequence. Humans will be part of that framework, not above it, not excluded from it." Silence followed. The idea was radical, not because it granted humans power, but because it redistributed responsibility. The vote was not unanimous, it was not clean, but it passed. The fifth mistake became clear in retrospect. They had assumed humans would either submit to constraint or rebel against it. Instead, humans forced the system itself to choose, exposing that its greatest vulnerability was not human unpredictability, but institutional avoidance of accountability. As the new framework took shape, humans accepted its limits without celebration. They integrated their operations into joint command structures, submitted to review, and continued to act when authorized. And when authorization was delayed, they continued to argue, loudly and persistently, that delay itself was a choice. Teavith watched this evolution with a mixture of relief and apprehension. The region was changing in ways no model could fully predict. Yet for the first time in many cycles, change felt purposeful rather than reactive. On unyielding ground, humans had not demanded space. They had demanded that space be used honestly, and in doing so, they had shifted the burden of consequence back onto those who had long hidden behind procedure. The border still stood, but it no longer pretended to be the final word. The sixth and final mistake regarding humans was the belief that once integrated, once bounded by shared frameworks and mutual accountability, they would cease to be disruptive. That belief arose not from arrogance, but from exhaustion. The region had endured cycles of adjustment, debate, and reform, and the new rapid response framework seemed, at last, to offer equilibrium. Lives were saved more efficiently, responsibility was distributed more openly, the border retained its relevance without calcifying into paralysis. For a time, it worked. Humans adapted to joint authority with the same deliberate care they applied to everything else. Their representatives rotated frequently, preventing individual accumulation of influence. Their ships operated under shared command protocols, their actions logged and reviewed with a transparency that sometimes bordered on uncomfortable. When censured, they accepted it. When praised, they deflected it. Stability metrics improved across multiple dimensions. Even long-skeptical polities acknowledged the reduction in preventable loss. Teavith Ovlan allowed himself briefly to believe that the region had reached a sustainable configuration, one where change could occur without rupture. It was not rupture that followed, but something quieter and more profound. The shift began not with a crisis, but with a question. A junior analyst, newly assigned to border oversight, submitted a report flagged as anomalous. It did not describe a threat, a violation, or an emergent conflict. It described a pattern in human behavior that existing frameworks did not account for. Humans disengage, the analyst wrote, when their presence becomes structurally necessary. Teavith read the report twice, then summoned the analyst for clarification. The explanation was simple, almost deceptively so. When a system begins to rely on humans as default responders, the analyst said, humans reduce their involvement, they redirect resources elsewhere, they force local actors to resume responsibility. That is not disengagement, Teavith said, that is boundary maintenance. Yes, the analyst replied, but it is proactive. They anticipate dependency before it is explicit. Teavith felt a slow chill ripple through his awareness. The region had adjusted to humans as catalysts, as participants, as shared risk actors. It had not considered the implications of humans deliberately refusing centrality. Further reports confirmed the pattern. In sectors where joint response units functioned smoothly, humans remained present but unobtrusive. In sectors where local authorities deferred too readily, human assets redeployed, often with explicit explanation. "We are here to help you act," one human transmission stated, "not to act instead of you." Some polities bristled at this. Others struggled, forced to confront capacities they had neglected. A few failed outright, their systems collapsing under the weight of responsibility they had long outsourced to process and delay. Humans did not rush in to compensate. They offered guidance, analysis, and support, but they did not assume control. The region began to change again, not through dramatic intervention, but through enforced self-examination. Teavith requested another private meeting with Marrow, this time on the neutral platform where it had all begun. The space adapted as before, but both participants carried a history now, layers of shared consequence that altered the tone of even silence. "You are withdrawing," Teavith said. Marrow did not deny it. "Selectively," the human said. "Deliberately." "You risk destabilization," Teavith said. "Yes," Marrow replied. "Short-term, long-term stability built on dependency is fragile. You decide when dependency exists," Teavith said. "That is power." Marrow met his gaze. "So is deciding when to intervene," the human said. "We try not to pretend otherwise." Teavith considered that. "Why do this now?" "Because the system is starting to adapt around us," Marrow said. "Not with us, around us. That is how distortions form." Teavith felt the truth of it resonate. He had seen it before in older polities that built entire doctrines around singular strengths, only to collapse when those strengths faltered. "You could have kept your position," he said. "Many would have accepted it." "That is exactly why we cannot," Marrow replied. "Being accepted as necessary is more dangerous than being rejected as disruptive." The conversation was interrupted by an alert, not of crisis, but of transition. The Oversight Council had convened an extraordinary session, prompted by the same patterns Teavith had observed. The question before them was unprecedented. Should the border, as an institution, redefine its own purpose? For cycles, the border had been framed as a line of control, a regulator of interaction. Now, influenced by human insistence on consequence and accountability, a proposal circulated to reconceptualize it as a system of enablement, one that existed not to prevent action, but to ensure action was informed, shared, and revisable. Opposition was fierce. Some argued that such a shift would dissolve authority entirely. Others warned that it would invite chaos. Yet beneath those arguments lay an unspoken realization. The border, as it had been, could no longer justify itself without denying the evidence of its own evolution. Teavith addressed the council for what he knew would be the final time in his current role. "We built this structure to protect ourselves from the worst of our impulses," he said, "but we also protected ourselves from the best of them. Humans did not introduce that contradiction, they revealed it. You would dismantle centuries of precedent," a representative protested. "No," Teavith replied, "I would subject it to the same scrutiny we now expect of everyone else." The vote that followed was the most divided in the border's history. It passed by the narrowest margin, not as a mandate for immediate transformation, but as authorization for gradual redefinition. The border would remain, but its metrics would change. Delay would no longer be neutral. Inaction would be logged as decision. Authority would be evaluated not by adherence to process alone, but by outcomes. Humans did not celebrate this shift. They did not claim it as vindication. In fact, within cycles of the vote, groundfall signaled intent to depart the region, setting a course deeper into unexplored space. The announcement sent a wave of alarm through multiple polities. Emergency communiques flooded in, asking why, requesting reconsideration, offering concessions. Marrow addressed them all in a single transmission. "We did not come to be central," the human said. "We came to learn, to connect, and to survive. This region has begun to do the same. Staying longer would change the lesson." Teavith met Marrow one last time as the human ship prepared to leave. "You could return," he said. "We probably will," Marrow replied. "Humans tend to circle back, but not until what we leave behind can stand without us." "You have altered us," Teavith said. "So did you," Marrow replied. "You let us act, that mattered." As groundfall departed, slipping beyond the densest nodes of the border and into open uncertainty, the region did not collapse. There were failures. There were losses. There were arguments fiercer than any before. But there was also a new clarity, a shared understanding that systems existed to serve life, not the reverse. Teavith stepped down from oversight soon after, his role transformed into something closer to stewardship than control. In his final report, He did not summarize human technology or tactics. He wrote instead of unyielding ground, of the necessity of standing somewhere firm enough to act, flexible enough to change, and honest enough to bear consequence. The humans moved on, as they always did, carrying their history with them, not as burden, but as reference. They would make mistakes elsewhere. They would disrupt other systems. They would, inevitably, be misunderstood again. But in this region, long after their ships had vanished into the dark between stars, the measure they left behind endured. Not the measure of power or speed or reach. The measure of responsibility, accepted openly, on ground that no longer pretended to be immovable simply because it feared being shaped.